Welcome to the first technical session and presentation. Mindful of the time, I just want to say that I'll be presenting on behalf of the other co-authors, Dr. Ouadi and Mr. Philip Lashley, who is on the call. So this particular bit of this research paper will be coming out of an actual project that has been ongoing, and we thought that it was a right session to bring to the fore the lessons learned, and more particularly how it becomes applicable to the CRFM countries, not only on this milestone, but as we go forward in the continuum of development. The fact is that the learning experience showed that there's a high volume of quality raw materials being made available from fish processing activity in Barbados. And of course, that volume of what we call or traditionally call waste goes to the landfill site, so some of it is actually discarded on near shore on the ocean. So that volume presented an opportunity to transform, of course, into something valuable in terms of a resource, but also one that could lend itself to income generation for rural and coastal community stakeholders, and of course create a valuable product, which we call fish silage. And silage is simply a liquid product that is produced from the whole fish, of course, the parts or the scrap from processing, to which, of course, added acids, enzymes, bacteria, and so on are added, which changes it from a solid mass to a liquid by breaking down the components to a low pH. Now, that high-value liquid goes into the manufacture of other value-added products, and it provided, from our experience, a very interesting and, of course, valuable entry point into the conversation of producing a livestock agriculture or aquatic food production resource, which could either be, of course, in terms of a liquid fertilizer or food, like livestock feed. But that composition, of course, is not pure silage into the feeds. It is, of course, a ration, which we will discuss in a few seconds. But, of course, to keep in mind that the volume to create the silage is 83% fish waste, molasses 12%, and an effective microorganism volume is added to speed up the process. But in the policy framework in Barbados, we understand that there are zero waste goals and other directives of government in terms of how it conducts its business are related to food and agriculture, and of course the wider space, the wider policy space as well, among different sectors, whether there could be environmental issues, economic issues, and in small island developing states, just as Dr. Clark mentioned about big ocean states, in small island developing states, of course, we know there's a land constraint, and the more land we use to commit to waste in terms of landfills and so on is, of course, less land resources available for other forms of development. And in a policy context, of course, we thought that this activity contributes to CARICOM's goal of reducing the extra-regional food imports by 25% by the year 2025. And this work was conducted with two key stakeholder groups, one being the Central Fish Processing Association, which is an all-women's fish processing organization, and it also included youth farmers and more seasoned practitioners of the Barbados Ruminants Farmers Society, or the BRFS. And I'll show you the distinctions of what the findings led to. And as of now, preliminary information is telling us that the volume of fish waste produced on the island is now up to 8.5 tons per day. When this work was done a few months ago, at that time, we were working with the assumption and the estimates from data collection that it was around 5 tons per day that goes to the landfill. So there's, of course, not only a compounding problem, but more available resource for processing. And we had said that through our calculations, about 1 ton, if we were to process about 1 ton of that raw material per day, it will mean that we would have approximately 240 tons or 240,000 kgs of fish silage being produced per year. But interestingly, because of a relatively new entry point and, of course, relatively low utilization, at the current rate, if we were to use that, we would have inputs of up to 5 years of food production. So the uptake of it is now relatively low. It is a developing sector. And in the wider world, we know that there's lots of opportunity. We know that a lot of this quality fish material, of course, is transferred into other types of processing. But this activity pointed mainly based on the expressed interest of stakeholders in looking at the developing of this fish silage product, the livestock feed, which we are about to discuss, and a liquid fertilizer options. So the fish processing and the key targets really focus on this discussion, but of course we acknowledge that there are lots of other opportunities that could be identified. And we know that there is some private sector processing of pet foods on the island of Barbados from the fish skins, dehydrated fish skins, as a chewable for dogs. So the data showed us, of course, that if we were to process that 5 tons per day and 90% of the average waste generated is usable. Not all of it, of course, could be directly transformed in the processing process. We know that there'll be some losses and some other issues and so on. But where we are, or where we are starting, of course, is very minimal. From the project, we were able to process about 100 pounds per day, and we want to acknowledge, of course, upfront that that is not a continuous activity. That processing would have been for the span of the project. So it means, therefore, that we are actually producing much less, or actually processing much less than 1% of that volume of waste that is generated per day. To give some context as to where the conversation began. And of course, through this presentation, we are looking at the prospects of ramping up that to 1,000 kilograms or 1 ton per day, as compared to, of course, the very minimal that we are currently able to absorb. And of course, that will put us into a better realm of approximately 20% utilization of waste on the island. Now, keep in mind, of course, that this is also one project. There could be, of course, a rationale or, of course, first mover advantage here, but it would lend itself to other forms of processing, as private sector has already expressed an interest in pursuing the liquid fertilizer option on the island. So, based on the data of the project, the ration used to develop for the rabbit feeds, that formula uses 6% fish silage in addition to dried and other ingredients to produce that ration. Similarly, for the sheep ration, it uses 13% fish silage. Therefore, at that current utilization, of course, all of the fish silage that is produced could be put into rabbit production. That is one assumption. But the discussion here is at its current requirements, if we transfer 6% of having processed 1 ton of raw material per day, we would now be producing in the vicinity of 750,000 kilograms of in terms of volume of animal ration, livestock ration. So that is the volume here, but it would suggest to us that there is a large surplus of fish silage that will become available. And just for keep in mind, or just for discussion at another point, is that the import profile of Barbados suggests that it is dependent on livestock feeds. That lends itself, of course, directly into the cost of production of meats on the island and has implications for food security, food prices, and all the connections we can make. And you can see here, of course, the volumes that are there. So that this particular surplus that we have leaves us with significant room for development, and it sets, of course, certain goals in terms of production targets and engagements of the sector. The project involves a multi-stakeholder approach led by the FAO, and we had one major finding when we determined the cost of production of the feeds, in that the farmers' groups were supported through the government department, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Security, and the Ministry of Youth and so on, in terms of providing them with a processing premises, sponsorship of their utility rates, and the farmers also contributed to the production of the feed by in-kind labor. And in that model led by the FAO facilitation, the cost of production of the feed, that ecosystem of support, reduced relatively significantly the cost of production of the feed, which made it competitive to the imported equivalent. So that the willingness of these beneficiaries, meaning that the farmers, the availability of their quality raw material on the island, cannot be overlooked because it presented an opportunity to develop an appropriate business model to produce feed or derive feed on the island. The findings quickly also suggest that there are savings to the farmers. The cost of production, if the farmers were involved in producing their own feeds through the sponsorship of a training and processing facility, brought them more competitive if you look at the import price of the feed, and therefore there was a savings for every 100 pounds of feed that the farmers utilized. Therefore, the cost of production was reduced. There's the possibility of course, less reliance on the imported equivalents, and of course, taking us closer to CARICOM's goal. We need to capitalize it in terms of expanding the capacity for it. There's, of course, the positive sides, which I'm sure all of us are keen to observe. But how do we take it forward? So just in wrapping up is to say that there is a need to expand that capacity to facilitate the farmer skill training and equipment to increase the throughput of the feed. And looking at the structure of the import dependence, it could guide us in terms of the development of additional livestock feed products and, sort of mapping the throughput of that proposed facility. This surplus fish silage lends itself to not only a wider range of feeds, but gives us several tasks on the horizon, which is feed production planning, price setting, public education, because farmers also are asking questions about the suitability of a fish-derived feed for herbivores, and other types of conversation like that had come out from the discussions. But in terms of wrapping up on a final note, that the implications to move this forward, we know that we have a general dependence on imported feeds for livestock in a region, whether it is poultry, sheep, rabbits, and so on. And so if we develop a marketable fish silage product, and that derived livestock feed that I quickly tried to describe, there are direct implications for regional import dependency and taking us towards that CARICOM goal, for example. The FAO approach and the stakeholder engagement here, I think, really positioned us as sort of like a model that could be used for development in other CRFM countries with similar waste management dynamics from fish processing, because we have proven the cost of production and what fit allows the feasibility for the farming sector. And finally, that opportunity to improve marketable products in country is one, but we are making positive farm business and livelihood impacts through the stakeholder engagement. It creates an opportunity for the possible sale of fish silage to either fertilizer production or feed processing with export potential within the region if there is not access to similar clean and quality raw material, or of course where there's smaller processing activities not to justify the investment in plant and equipment. So on that quick note, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your patience. You can feel free to scan the code when the presentations are available, and we can continue the conversation. Thank you very much.